I want to start with Ahmed first. Almost every single aspect of Palestinian life is controlled by Israel, and that goes for all three of you. Yet, these municipal elections, Ahmed, are important. Just walk us through why they are important.
Thank you for having me, and greetings to your guests and the audience. Of course, it's very important for the Palestinian people to practice their democratic right and to elect their representatives and leaders in order to send a political message to the world that Palestine is a state and has a governance and has a people who are fully aware of their rights and want to practice democracy, despite the genocide, despite the destruction of the Israeli occupation that's surrounding our cities and villages, threatening our life in every aspect. And here we are standing tall and strong despite the genocide to go to elect with a high election turnout rate that is one of the highest in the region and probably around the world. That is a strong message that Palestinians are highly educated and full aware of their rights and want to build their state and reconstruct their country despite the mass crimes of the occupation. And the participation of Gaza and Deir al-Balah sends a message that Gaza and West Bank is united under the Palestinian flag.
Javier, but this election wasn't about self-determination. It wasn't about self-rule. This was about, effectively, municipal services, like picking up the trash. Does that dilute it? Because it really isn't that important, surely.
Thank you, Imran. I think historically, Palestinian municipal elections have been extraordinarily important for the Palestinian national movement. Let's remember that right after the starting of the Israeli occupation, Israel tried to have something like municipal elections 1972, 1976, in an idea to divide Palestinians between the PLO outside and the people here. It didn't work for them. In 76, PLO candidates won almost every single seat, and that's why we didn't have elections till the Palestinian Authority came to Palestine. But I would not put these elections out of context. Very few people actually, compared to the amount of the Palestinians could vote. Myself in Ramallah, I couldn't vote myself. And I think the expectations for what a municipal election could bring are too high. And just to give an example, I mean, I'm from Bethlehem originally. One of the main problems that Bethlehem has is traffic congestion. It could not be solved by a mayor. It would be solved by taking part of this 87% of Bethlehem that is occupied by Israeli settlements and military bases. So in other words, it's always important to have elections, but at the same time, we should not put those elections out of context. Just one last point, Imran. I think the previous elections 4 years ago had much more competition than these elections we just had this week.
Jalal, you're also unable to vote, but for a slightly different reason. You live in occupied East Jerusalem. So you don't have any rights anyway. You can't vote in the municipal elections because of the apartheid system, effectively, and you can't vote in occupied East Jerusalem either. So what do the elections mean to you?
Thank you, Imran. I'll probably start with answering, correcting you slightly. I am able to vote if I'm a resident in the city of Ramallah. However, as I'm a resident in Jerusalem, my locality is not Ramallah, but it's not excluding me to vote. I'm a big fan. I'm a very big proponent of local elections of all kinds. Local elections reflect local values and democracy, and trying to, find a way forward together for any type of community. And I'm really proud of Ramallah and other places across the West Bank for the democratic semblance that the municipal elections would have had in previous years, but this is not the case this year at all. I frequent Ramallah perhaps more than Jerusalem, and I've been very carefully following a situation where this municipal election, which is local elections, it's not about Palestinian unity, it's about local representation and belonging and services. In a way, as Javier did mention, it does play a bigger role when people feel like they belong in a democratic process. However, we should address the elephant in the room, is that there is no legitimate process of representation for the Palestinians, who I am one of them. As a Palestinian Jerusalemite, I feel excluded from these processes because there isn't a larger process that includes me as a Jerusalemite, doesn't even include just not West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, also Palestinians elsewhere, in a way that would say this is a leadership that speaks for the Palestinian people, whether it's between the river and the sea or whether it's the Palestinian people as a whole unit, through the PLO. I don't feel this, so there is an exclusion that I feel I'm always forced to face due to Israel and due to this current reality.
Ahmed, one of the driving forces that the Palestinian president was very keen to push was this is about Palestinian unity. Yet, Mahmoud Abbas amended the election law to go back to what the PLO had actually said, which is about recognizing Israel, ending the armed struggle. That's something that Hamas could not agree to. So effectively, Mahmoud Abbas froze out Hamas. What do you make of that accusation?
I believe that's not true. There was no precondition for the election. It was only asked that they recognize that the PLO to be the sole representative of the Palestinian people, which is quite, well known already. But even that was removed later on, and the parties were involved in the elections. The left participated, PFLP and the Democratic Front has participated in the elections. And the gates were open for anybody who want to nominate themselves. And despite the calls and the campaign that was led by Hamas and the Islamist forces to boycott the elections, we had a turnout rate of 56%. So that is a referendum by the Palestinian people that they believe on the national unity and democratic process, and believe in the landslide victory of Fatah, that it's a referendum that they believe in the national.
Ahmed, you can't call it a landslide victory when not everybody voted and there was only 56% in the areas that were allowed to vote. I want to come to Javier here. Javier, you're shaking your head as Ahmed was speaking. Why?
Because again, I think elections are a good thing. And in some places, the elections took place well. But we cannot claim that those elections were as inclusive. I think there are many issues that prevented people from presenting other lists in order to be able to compete. Of course, there were economic matters that affected, of course, the participation here. But at the same time, I fully agree with the PLO political platform, but in order to put the political platform as a condition to run for elections, this is something that prevented a number of sources. And I spoke with some candidates. I spoke, for example, with people that wanted to run in Ramallah. And they told me we were not willing to sign on those conditions.
I want to come to Jalal. The PLO, we just talked about that. That's the Palestine Liberation Organization. It's the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, recognized by the international community. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, is relatively new, only came about after the Oslo Accords in 1993. So the simple question I want to ask you, as a Palestinian living in occupied East Jerusalem, has the PA been a failure?
The PA is there. However, again, I repeat that there is no legitimacy for it to be the body that, rules over the Palestinian people and decides over their fate and the future. There is a lack of any legitimacy due to the lack of any democratic process, whether it's the PA or the main party. The ruling party is Fatah indeed, and there isn't a genuine democracy within the party that people can feel like this is a representation of a major sector of the Palestinian society, especially those living under occupation. There are many priorities for people living under occupation. These include literally the safety of their lives and their livelihoods, the lands. There is an unprecedented settler advancement throughout the West Bank over the last 2 years, and it feels like this PA has been absent from this existential threat. So this is a problem where people feel like, where is the PA and why is it claiming that this democratic process for the municipality is a show of its success when we are actually facing a different reality here on the ground?
Ahmed, the criticism of the PA is, something that I hear all the time, particularly when I've lived in Palestine itself. And it's something, one of the things people say is that the Palestinians are the only people that have to give guarantees under the security guarantee to the occupiers, that the Palestinian Authority is a functionary, not to the Palestinian people, but to the occupation. What do you make of that accusation?
These are false accusations. First of all, nobody asked them to give guarantees for the security of the occupation. We only ask that we respect the PLO agreements of the past I don't see any party in any country in the world where they say put preconditions for the government before going to elections. I haven't heard the Labour Party, for example, in the UK saying, I won't recognize the parliament if I go to the elections. But yet we hear it from the far right and the far left in Palestine. Of course, that's false. Nobody put any preconditions. We're only saying that this is the PLO, the sole representative of the Palestinian people, and we refuse wholeheartedly any external agenda or agendas. And we're only going to a Palestinian national agenda that is made and created by the Palestinians, but not by outside forces. And when we speak about democracy, I don't believe there is anybody more democratic faction in Palestine more than Fatah. It is we who called for the elections of the local elections. And it's we who called for the syndicate election, which we also won by vast majority. I believe your guests will suspect or doubt that, but they could go back to the numbers. And Hamas has participated under independent names, independent lists. So they need to revise their information. This victory is a call by the Palestinian national entities that we want a united front and we want a Palestinian program that is realistic and capable of achieving actual results, not something imaginary and based on imagination and false promises from outside.
No, I want to come to Javier here. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a Hamas versus Fatah kind of discussion here, but I do want to focus on the Palestinian Authority. It was created, as I've said before, after the 1993 Oslo Accords, and it was designed to effectively become the Palestinian government and the Palestinian governance system. That didn't happen because of the occupation. Now, just run us through the reasons that the Palestinian Authority was effectively strangled at birth, because I know you have opinions on this.
What the Palestinian Authority, I mean, when it came out to exist, it was part of an interim agreement that was supposed to last only for 5 years, which is the Oslo Interim Agreement, and that's how we started to have elections here in the occupied Palestinian territory, with the exception of East Jerusalem. But once again, I think that the discussion should go into what are the prospects for a future of Palestinian democracy rather than what we have had now. So far, I don't see this as a referendum. It was not presented by Fatah nor by any other party as a referendum. It was a very local election. Once again, in some places, there was a very sincere competition. In many other places, there was no competition. And as a matter of fact, two of the most important municipalities for the history of Palestinian national movement, Nablus and Ramallah, did not have a competitive election. So in other words, I think it's important to present the position that there was an election. I think it was very important that Deir al-Balah was included in Gaza, but let's not take those elections out of context.
Let's not take the elections out of context, says Javier. Jalal, I want to put that to you because most of Gaza has been destroyed, so they couldn't have elections. 60–70% of the occupied West Bank is either got illegal settlements on it or illegal settlements are planned to be built by the Israelis. Some of them illegal under Israeli law, all of them illegal under international law. You can't have elections, you can't have a democracy in those situations. What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry to be cheesy, but you never say never, especially to things like this. There's always a way, and there's been solutions proposed in the past where various international actors were willing to intervene to guarantee that elections were held, especially in Jerusalem, where I'm from. I think the big obstacle that stopped the last major election that was supposed to happen in Palestine was, in my view, an excuse that Jerusalem was excluded due to Israeli occupation decisions. And I am aware that that is not fully the case, because there were many alternatives being proposed and being put forward on the table for Jerusalemites to participate meaningfully in this process to ensure that East Jerusalem is not excluded in any Palestinian national election process. And I feel, and again, this is a political decision to escape accountability in front of the populace, the people. The ruling party, again, is avoiding facing the people. And there are ways to include not only Palestinians between the river and the sea, again, diaspora, in a bigger process for the PLO. And that's not really given the importance that it should be when there's such a crisis of representation. And we are in such a critical position in our history as a Palestinian people. So it's important to have some kind of legitimacy for any actor who purchased to speak in the name of the Palestinian people going forward.
Ahmed, is it time to disband the PA and go back to the PLO and get Palestinian unity first, even if that unity is fractured by opinion, but get unity first and renegotiate with the international community for a different type of Palestinian authority? Are we at that stage?
Look, President Mahmoud Abbas made a decree calling for general elections and for a parliamentarian elections in November. So that was a clear form and a clear call by the Fatah movement led by President Mahmoud to go for unity. And the only way to unite ourselves is through the ballot box. And we are not afraid to go for an election. And we called all the Palestinian parties to go that way. And we have called for a united front where we, under the dome of the PLO, that we devise our political program, our national liberation agenda of how to face this catastrophic situation we are living right now after 3 years of genocide and the ongoing genocide that did not stop until now. And I have to point out that to your guest and the audience, there it seems misunderstanding. The local authorities that did not have elections, that because there was a victory by acclamation and a consensus among the national parties. So when that is by law, this is something very common and everywhere around the world. When there is no competition, that means it's uncontested election. So therefore, automatically the list or the consensus list is already winning. So that's what happened in Ramallah and that's what happened in Nablus.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
Factions,
if you've got one
factions.
If no one disagrees with that, if you've got one candidate and everybody votes for that candidate is won. If there is competition and a second candidate and people vote for that candidate is won. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. What I would like to get to the bottom with you, Ahmed, is the fact that these elections were held under extreme circumstances and do not represent the entirety of the Palestinian people. That's a point you have to concede.
Of course, it is happening in an extreme situation, and that extreme situation is going to stay for more than we expect, and we have to face it. We have to face it by geographically uniting Palestine between West Bank and Gaza. Hamas need to end their coup that started in 2007 and go back to the Palestinian house. We have to go to the elections in Jerusalem. This is not something symbolic. This is a matter of sovereignty. East Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, and we will not accept anything to undermine these facts. And regarding the Palestinian diaspora, when we call for the PNC, the Palestinian National Council elections, which include 350 seats, 200 in the occupied Palestinian territories, and 150 from the diaspora, then that is a representative for the all Palestinians all around the world. And we are calling for elections, not for
Sorry, Ahmed, I'm going to stop you there because I want to come to the other... Ahmed, I want to stop you there because I want to come to the other guests as well. Javier, let's talk about this in terms of kind of how you move forward. Now, we've had these elections. They are a symbol, says, Fatah and a lot of other people, actually, of Palestinian unity. That surely is the most important thing here, not the fact that most Palestinians couldn't vote. Do you think?
No, I entirely disagree. Once again, I think some places would really have participation, and it was important to have elections. But we cannot claim that the Palestinian decision-making process is as inclusive as it should be. And looking forward, I think it's very important to pick on elements that have been raised. For example, elections for the Palestinian National Council that is supposed to represent all Palestinians worldwide. I have never myself elected anyone for the Palestinian National Council, and I think it's very important that this opportunity could be given. But in order to go to those elections, you need to have agreements between political parties. You need to have an electoral registry that I don't think so far it's there for Palestinians in exile. So, in other words, I think there is so much work to do. There are elements that Palestinians in exile, in particular, they don't trust much about how things are being done. But I also believe that if we are able to unite as Palestinians with the goal of ending the Israeli occupation, I think there is still an opportunity.
Jalal, what do you think that opportunity is then? If we're talking about ending the occupation as the end goal of all of this, then perhaps Palestinian Authority municipal elections, picking up the trash, providing services are a bit of a distraction, do you think?
Not at all. I don't think it's a distraction. I think we need to encourage local democracy, just because I do foresee a collapse of this entire institution of the PA, and I'm seeing the financial trouble that people are going through on a individual and personal level. I'm seeing the level of coercion it takes to actually control and to influence the results of major decisions in politics and elections locally. I can see how volatile everything is, and I believe that there needs to be some form of local representation for people. And if we see more, localities processing in a way where it would elect a form of leadership, it could actually provide a voice for Palestinians who are living in these communities under occupation, where people feel like, oh, we belong to this. But the problem with this current process is the fact that it's exclusionary of various groups of Palestinian society, and also it's not really fully representative of Palestinians living under occupation. Yes, a high turnout. However, there are no signs that would make me feel encouraged about the results of this current municipal elections. I just do believe that we do need to encourage any kind of process that goes on locally to encourage participation.
Ahmed, I started this conversation by asking you, these elections are important because they show that the Palestinians are united. That's the Fatah position. Is anything that you've heard over the last half hour made you change your mind on that, or do you still think that these are very important to show the world that the Palestinians are united?
Well, we have to look to the facts on the grounds. This was an inclusive election. If the door was open for any faction to go to make and register a list for its party, and that's
very difficult to do when your house has been destroyed in Gaza. It's very difficult to do when you can't get to certain places in the West Bank.
Of course, if you allow me, with the situation in Gaza, we have a genocide, and our people are decimated. Many of them are living in refugee tents. They have scarcity in food and in medicine and everything. The turnout was 22% in Deir al-Balah, in the middle of Gaza. And Deir al-Balah was capable to go for the vote because among the destruction in Gaza, it was the least. It had 45%, I believe, destruction. And we have to point out to the elephant in the room. The one who stopped democracy is Hamas coup in 2007. Gaza is banned from voting since 2007 because of Hamas. Now, thankfully, they have revised that decision and what allowed for this election to take place after the catastrophic destruction that they caused through their unstrategic thinking and going unilaterally into an adventure that was not voted nor has been discussed with the Palestinian national factions. We have been doing elections since 2007. That did not stop. We have went to the local elections in different occasions, 2022 and in 2018 and so on. And we have made the syndicates election just recently. And we are going to the PNC election in November, and actually to Fatah elections.
Ahmed, sorry, we have run out of time, and I did give you a clear run to say your piece, and you've put Fatah's position very, very clearly there. I want to thank all our guests, Ahmed Fatou, Jalal Abu Khater, and Javier Abu Eid. And I want to thank you as well for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. That's it from me, Imran Khan, and the team here in Doha. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay tuned.
On that, he set himself a very
in-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
Syria, Lebanon.
Joining me in the studio.
Inside Story.
Bases
on Al Jazeera.
Hello there, I'm Nick Clark. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our continuing coverage of the developments out of Iran, Lebanon and the United States. Coming up in the next 60 minutes.
the proposal was being discussed. I don't want to get ahead of the president or his national security team. What I will reiterate is that the president's red lines with respect to Iran have been made very, very clear, not just to the American public, but also to them as well.
Yes, the White House says an Iranian proposal is being analysed that could bring about an end to the war. Iran's top diplomat meets Vladimir Putin. Abbas Araghchi says Tehran is looking at a request from the United States for talks.
Open the strait. Let ships pass. No tolls. No discrimination.
Rival blockades of the strait take centre stage at the UN Security Council in a debate on maritime security. Fears of a return to war in Lebanon after Hezbollah once again rules out direct talks with Israel. And armed groups in Mali force Russian mercenaries working with the government to retreat after attacks across the country.
And just who are the people who make up Donald Trump's trusted team of negotiators? And what exactly are they expected to achieve in diplomatic talks with Iran? That's coming up on This Is America.
So the White House has confirmed that an Iranian proposal to end the war is under discussion. Caroline Leavitt says while it's being considered, Washington's red lines remain in place.
I will confirm the president has met with his national security team this morning. The meeting may be ongoing, maybe not. I don't want to speak affirmatively because I was prepping to come out here. But the proposal was being discussed. I don't want to get ahead of the president or his national security team. What I will reiterate is that the president's red lines with respect to Iran have been made very, very clear, not just to the American public, but also to them as well.
Ali Hashem is live in Tehran, but first let's speak to Alan Fisher, who's standing by for us at the White House. So, Alan, the Iranian proposal apparently under discussion. Do we know who's looking at it and when perhaps there may be a response?
Are with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, or certainly have been. Donald Trump is still in the Oval Office at the moment. It'd be wrong to say that this meeting is only about the Iranian proposal. They're actually discussing the next stages. There is every possibility, of course, that Donald Trump could announce an end to the temporary ceasefire. He could announce that the bombing is going to start again, or it could be that he is willing to send a team to Pakistan. You'll remember that everything seemed to be set for talks at the weekend. Then on Saturday morning, he decided that he was pulling Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner from the trip. He said it was far too go, too long a trip, 18 hours with nothing concrete to discuss. And then on Truth Social on Saturday morning, he urged Iran to call him with some new ideas, saying that the United States had all the cards. It's clear the United States has a number of red lines. Donald Trump has said it several times before. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, not now, not ever. And that has got to be the basis of any agreement. He said that any agreement that's discussed will be better than the Iran nuclear deal put together by Barack Obama. So there's still room for talks. We understand that behind the scenes, nothing that we can see in public, that Pakistani mediators are trying to find a way to get both sides back together and round the table. But for the moment, the United States position is Donald Trump is talking over next steps with his national security advisor. Watch Truth Social. We might find out more in the coming hours.
Indeed, we'll keep a close eye on it. Alan, for the time being, thanks very much. That's Alan Fisher there at the White House. Well, Iran's top diplomat says Tehran is considering a request from Washington for talks. Abbas Araghchi made the comments on social media after he met Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. He said negotiations have stalled because of what he called Washington's destructive habits, unreasonable demands and frequent changes in position. During the meeting, Putin pledged his support to bring an end to the war.
They have achieved none of their goals. This is why we ask for negotiation. We are now considering.
We see how courageously and heroically the Iranian people are fighting for their independence and sovereignty. Of course, we very much hope that, based on this courage and will for independence, the Iranian people will, under the leadership of a new leader, make it through this difficult period of trials and that peace will follow. From our side, we will do everything that is in your interest, in the interest of all nations in the region, so that peace is reached as soon as possible,
So to Tehran, Ali Hashim is standing by for us there, monitoring events. So, Ali, do we know where the foreign minister is going next and what that might tell us?
Well, this is going to be his last country in the tour. He started in Pakistan, then Oman, and now Russia. So from St. Petersburg, Abbas Araghchi is supposed to come to Tehran. Now, coming back to Tehran with probably a different perspective, especially after he conveyed Iran's new plan to the mediators, and now that the U.S. is studying the plans, and Iran already updated and briefed its partners in the region and beyond, Oman, and of course phone calls with several foreign ministers and officials in Qatar, in Egypt, in Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and of course his meeting with President Putin, where he conveyed Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei's letter to Putin. And this, of course, is within a framework of the strategic partnership of between the two countries. Iran is briefing or updating its partners on the next steps. So it's ready to talk the end of the war, and following the end of the war, it will open other issues such as the nuclear issues, such as the sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. But for now, it's ready to talk the end of war, ending a comprehensive end of this war from Lebanon to Iran, and at the same time guarantees that the war will not be repeated. Now, will this be accepted by the United States? This is the big question here. And will this bring Iran some benefits aside from the lifting of the blockade on its ports? Will there be some sanction relief? Will there be some assets unfrozen? Actually, these are the issues that are currently being questioned. However, there's something very interesting, that if these talks really were going to materialize with Iran and the United States agreeing through such a mechanism, whereas opening the strait, lifting the blockade could lead to a long ceasefire or an end to the war, this could be a trust-building measure that could pave the way for the next steps.
Ali, thanks for that. Ali Hashim there in Tehran. Let's head to Moscow now. Yulia Shapovalova is there with more on the Iranian foreign minister's visit to St. Petersburg.
What we've just heard was just the tip of the iceberg, because we heard just something what was meant for journalists. Vladimir Putin stated that the people of Iran are heroically fighting for their sovereignty, that Russia hopes that the Iranian people will overcome this really hard period of time, and that peace will prevail. And he also noted that Russia will do everything possible to ensure peace in the Middle East as soon as possible, while, according to Abbas Araghchi, the relations between Moscow and Tehran represent a strategic partnership and will be strengthened. And of course, the two are very, very close together. And of course, everyone is interested whether Russia supplies weapons to Iran, but the Kremlin, as we know, has denied many times these weapons supplies to Iran, despite the comprehensive partnership agreement between the two, because it is actually aimed at strengthening military cooperation between the two countries and includes security and defense, but it excludes the formation of a military alliance. Apart from that, everything is possible, and it's not prohibited. But despite Moscow is denying the weapons supplies, according to Western intelligence, Russia has agreed with Iran on the supply of drones to the country and also on sharing data on targets for strikes on U.S. military facilities. And of course, the negotiations are continuing right now, and hopefully later on we'll learn more about the discussions that have been taking place in St. Petersburg. But of course, the two countries have been in contact since the beginning of the war, and Moscow says it is ready to contribute to the settlement of the conflict and to contribute to the search for solutions by political and diplomatic means.
Well, dozens of countries are holding a special session at the UN on Monday, warning that closure of the Strait of Hormuz is threatening global trade and energy supplies. The waterway is still caught between rival blockades by both Iran and the United States, of course. The Security Council meeting comes amid a near-total collapse in shipping through the vital corridor. And diplomats are weighing new proposals from Tehran to reopen the strait in exchange for an end to the conflict. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres issued an urgent appeal.
Navigational rights and freedoms through the Strait of Hormuz must be respected, as affirmed by this Council's resolution 2817. These principles must be upheld in full and without delay. I appeal to the parties: open the strait, let ships pass, no tolls, no discrimination, let trade resume, let the global economy breathe.
The most pressing issue, of course, before us is the Strait of Hormuz, and this crisis is not just affecting international shipping, it is driving up costs and sending shockwaves throughout energy markets and supply chains far beyond the region, with impact for all of our citizens and our communities and their cost of living. So we must get the strait reopened fully and unconditionally. Freedom of navigation must be restored in line with international law. Shipping and seafarers must not be used as leverage, and there is no place for tolls or permissions in international straits. Freedom of navigation means navigation must be free.
Let us speak now to Kristen Salumi, who's live for us at UNHQ in New York. So, Kristen, this, of course, is an issue which is creating problems right around the world. What do they hope to achieve here, do you think?
Well, we've been hearing many delegations at the United Nations appeal for de-escalation, for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and respect for international law. Of course, the strait is where thousands of cargo ships have been left stranded. Some 20,000 maritime workers are also stuck. We heard many of the experts briefing the council members talk about the effect this is happening that this is having on oil supplies, food supplies around the world. Ever since the United States and Iran and Israel attacked Iran in February 28th, the impact, of course, disrupting these crucial supplies, causing prices to rise on countries that really aren't even directly involved in this conflict. Bahrain called the meeting and appealed to member states to enforce international law. The foreign minister of Bahrain calling the closure of the strait a disruption of international law, a violation of international law. And the U.S. ambassador saying that it was times like these that the United Nations was built for, again, appealing on member states to take action to get the strait reopened. But then we also heard from Russia and Russia's ambassador, who blocked a past resolution on reopening the strait in the Security Council. He accused the United States and Israel of provoking Iran's response with their, quote, unprovoked attack on Iranian facilities. So while there is hope that this meeting will lead to pressure on Iran and help find a way forward, we are seeing many of the debates that are playing out on the world stage happening right here in New York.
Indeed, many and various debates. Kristen, thanks for that time being. Kristen Salumi there at the UN in New York. So let's have more now on that proposal that the US media outlet Axios is reporting that Iran has put forward. It's been communicated to Washington via Pakistani mediators. It's been discussed at the very highest level. Tehran has proposed that a ceasefire between the US, Israel and Iran be extended indefinitely, or that hostilities be ended permanently. Future talks on Iran's nuclear program are conditional and will only be held at a later stage, importantly. Tehran first wants the American naval blockade of Iran lifted. The White House has confirmed that Iran's proposal is being discussed by the president and his top national security advisors. So let's take this on now with Negar Mortazavi, who is a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy, also the host of the Iran podcast. Welcome to the program, Negar. So this latest proposal that Iran has tabled, is this a genuine move to de-escalate the energy crisis, the blockade of the strait, or a tactical move to try and remove the US leverage of their blockade?
I mean, I think both. In Tehran's viewpoint, there is a chance for diplomacy. I think they want to exit the war. But there's also very little, if any, trust for Washington. So I think it's a little bit of both. Of course, the Strait of Hormuz, their chokehold on 20% of global energy, driving up prices, creating this crisis around the world that everyone wants to end. That has been their main leverage, essentially their golden card. And now they obviously want the U.S. blockade removed so that they can continue to use that card if needed, or exit the war in a more permanent way. And I also think the issue of the nuclear talks, that's just a conclusion they came to possibly after the Islamabad talks didn't bring results. I mean, the U.S. sent the vice president, number 2. Iran sent a very high-level official. It was historic since the Iranian Revolution, but nothing came out of it.
But those nuclear talks, forgive me for interrupting, but those nuclear talks are a red line, apparently, for the United States. And by just kicking them down the road, that's going to make the whole thing not feasible for the United States, is it?
I mean, the nuclear issue has been a main issue for the U.S. for many administrations and presidents until President Trump started this war and he created this new problem, which is the Strait of Hormuz, that now has become the top goal of the war. So, I mean, if you look at the progression of the past weeks and the war and how this issue became out of nowhere, that's one point. But I also think the nuclear issue, I mean, the nuclear program and that sort of deal or negotiation is very complex. I mean, we have seen one successful nuclear deal negotiations under President Obama. That took 2 years, 2 years of intense negotiations. You can't just bring 2 high officials to Islamabad for a few hours and make a nuclear deal
that's better.
That's better than that deal. Exactly. So I think this is also a matter of logistics and time and patience, which unfortunately doesn't exist on the U.S. side, on the White House side. So I don't think it's necessarily kicking the can down the road, but rather buying more time for a more complex issue. And Tehran did offer what the Omani mediators said was a pretty good deal in Geneva before the war started, but it was just short of full capitulation for President Trump. It was better than the JCPOA, but not good enough.
OK, so this latest proposal, do you think the U.S. will buy it?
We'll see. We'll see. I think, I mean, multiple things. The energy crisis around the world is putting pressure. We see the Germans now publicly criticizing the U.S. strategy in war. The U.K. wants no part in this war. They want the crisis to end. It's created problems, energy problems in Europe, across Asia. And so there's that pressure inside the U.S. Energy prices are going up. It's going to, impact other prices. And so there's that pressure. The war is very unpopular in the U.S. And then there's also the May 1st deadline of the 60 days, which will officially need U.S. congressional approval. So is it a war? Is it going to be endless? Is it not? I think all of these are pressuring President Trump. And then finally, of course, the fact that the goalpost has moved throughout the war, but nothing really has been achieved. Regime change wasn't achieved, destroying the nuclear program, destroying the army, destroying the Navy, and now reopening the Strait of Hormuz wasn't achieved through the battlefield. So I think there has to be a diplomatic solution. But of course, both sides feel like they have leverage, so they need to find a way to bridge that gap.
And finally, just very briefly, you mentioned other nations like the UK, like Germany, other nations in Europe and elsewhere. And then there is this talk of potentially them forming a coalition, a maritime coalition, to try and ease the situation in the Strait. Is that feasible?
Possibly. I mean, we have to see, is it going to be more peaceful, through negotiations and agreement? Because Iran, I think, is trying to create this regional framework for Hormuz, not a passage fee, but more a fee for service. They're looking at other international examples to see how they can, post-war, how they can turn it into something that's acceptable by the world, is not seen as discrimination, as the Secretary General was saying. I mean, that's important. And of course, the countries in the region, I mean, the GCC, it looks like Iran is expanding its diplomatic efforts to try to make it more regional and more global, of course, with the trip to Moscow added to all of that.
All right. Nega Mortazavi, appreciate it very much. Thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Well, the Israeli military and Iran-backed Lebanese armed group Hezbollah are trading fire despite a US-brokered ceasefire. An initial 10-day pause in fighting was recently extended by 3 weeks. But Hezbollah wasn't part of those talks between Israel and the Lebanese government and has called the truce meaningless. On the ground in southern Lebanon, Israeli strikes have killed at least 2 people, and that brings the death toll to 22 just over the weekend. Hezbollah's leader, Naim Qassem, reiterated that the group rejects direct negotiations with Israel, and he says the talks only benefit, quote, the enemy, and that the group will never give up arms, which is one of Israel's main demands. And thousands of people have fled their homes because of the violence. Malcolm Webb visited a shelter in the city of Sidon.
The people running this displacement shelter in a school in the city of Sidon in southern Lebanon say that since the start of March, they hosted most of 1,000 people staying in tents or staying in the school classrooms. But they say most of them went home since the ceasefire over the last 10 days. But in the last couple of days, that's all changed following a surge of Israeli airstrikes across the south. They say hundreds of them have come back, and now it's full of families once again who'd hoped for a return to normality, but their hopes have been dashed. On Sunday, Israel's military told people to leave several villages north of the Litani River, far from the area it occupies by the border, and then bombed them. In one of them, Khadija Hashem says she'd been trying to rebuild her life.
There were many aircraft overhead, and then they struck a village, one they previously said was safe. About half an hour later, they struck again. People didn't have enough time to evacuate. There was panic. Cars were lining up on the roads. Then the road itself was hit. Many civilians were killed. It seemed like indiscriminate fire.
The US announced a 3-week extension to the ceasefire last week. The governments of Lebanon and Israel are due to hold talks. None of it has helped people here.
We lost trust in Israel, like they don't respect, ceasefire. They don't respect, human beings. Though they shoot. Whatever the result is, whatever who's being targeted, nobody knows. What I can see in my own eyes, they're targeting people. Civilians are getting killed.
The Israeli army says it targets Hezbollah's fighters. In the area it now occupies, it's been blowing up entire towns. Huda Haurani told us her parents' home was destroyed. She says she returned to her village last week, but had to flee Israeli airstrikes.
Hezbollah did not break the truce. The Israeli army violated it first by striking civilians and destroying homes. They speak about a yellow line, but this is all our land, and we will take it back.
The children who normally attend this school aren't studying at the moment. Neither are children from villages in the south which have been destroyed, blown up by Israeli demolitions. Neither are those from villages which are currently being bombed. And all the people we've spoken to here who've been displaced for the second time in less than 2 months say that in their view there is no ceasefire because it's not safe for them to go home. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Sidon, Lebanon.
The man accused of storming into the White House Correspondents' Dinner is being charged with the attempted assassination of US President Donald Trump. Cole Allen will be formally charged for using a firearm in a violent crime and as for assaulting a federal officer. Police are reviewing a manifesto believed to be linked to the suspect.
As you know, I was seated next to President Trump and the First Lady when the shots were fired before Secret Service swiftly moved us to safety backstage. The president's calm in the face of chaos, while yet another individual was trying to take his life, was really remarkable to witness. We can and we should have fierce disagreement in this country. As you all know, we disagree often, myself in this role and all of you in the news media, but those disagreements must remain peaceful. Debating, peaceful protesting, and voting are how we need to settle disagreements, not bullets. Nobody in recent years has faced more bullets and more violence than President Trump. This political violence stems from a systemic demonization of him and his supporters by commentators, yes, by elected members of the Democrat Party, and even some in the media. This hateful and constant and violent rhetoric directed at President Trump day after day after day for 11 years has helped to legitimize this violence and bring us to this dark moment.
Tuareg rebels and armed groups in Mali have captured the northern town of Kidal. Russian Africa Corps mercenaries say they've withdrawn from the town. This follows a wave of coordinated attacks over the weekend targeting military sites. The defense minister was killed when his residence came under attack. General Sadio Kamara was a central figure in the military government and instrumental in strengthening ties with Russia. Al Jazeera's Nicholas Hack reports from the neighbouring Senegalese capital of Dakar.
Mali's government of transition
have announced 2 days of mourning following the death of Sadio Camara, the defense minister, and the circumstance of his death has really shaken people in Mali. The death that took place in Kati, which is a garrison town, the military headquarters, which is supposed to be the most secure area in the country. No news yet of Modibo Kone, who is the chief of intelligence services, and there's certainly questions over his handling of the affair. How did this, what appeared to be pre-planned, well-coordinated attack that took place in Bamako, in Kati, and other key cities of the country take place? How were they caught off guard? Now, a senior figure of the military, General Umar Jara, who's the chief of the general staff, on Malian television said that there's a process of readapting the Malian forces, but in reality, he's falling short of calling full-on defeat. In the town of Kidal in the north, we're seeing Malian forces surrendering their weapons to Al-Qaeda fighters and Tuareg fighters that are holding control of the city of Kidal. Not just the Malian forces that are leaving town, but also their associate, the Russian mercenaries that were supporting them. And so it is the Algerians that are mediating the exit of the Russian forces out of the camp of Kidal and other localities in the north. Left out of these negotiations is the Malian military itself, the Malian military junta and the president of transition. Still no news of Assimi Goïta following Saturday's attack. Meanwhile, fighters of Al-Qaeda and Tuareg fighters are holding what appears to be a blockade, a siege surrounding Bamako, the capital, but also the garrison town of Kati. Nicholas Hawke, Al Jazeera, Dakar.
In Sudan, 3 years of war have severely disrupted access to food and life-saving aid. Millions are starving. Famine was declared in some regions, largely due to sieges by the paramilitary rapid support forces. And as Hibber Morgan reports, there's no respite from hunger, even for those fleeing to the capital, Khartoum.
This is where Marasi Al-Fadil and her children came to seek safety. There's not much here. An incomplete building in a compound in Durman, in Sudan's capital, Khartoum. They fled from the city of El Fasher 6 months ago. She escaped from a siege imposed by the rapid support forces as they moved to take control of the city. Marasi says hunger made her leave just days before the paramilitary group overran El Fasher.
The siege made life hard. Goods could not come in. Anyone who attempted to bring in food was detained or killed. And there was daily shelling, so we couldn't even go to the market. And if we did, things were very expensive because of the siege.
The siege on El Fasher lasted 18 months before the RSF took full control last October. It created a hunger crisis so severe the UN declared famine. Famine was also declared in Kornoy and Umbero in North Darfur and in Kadugli in South Kordofan, also because of an RSF siege there and several other areas. The UN says its inability to reach those in need because of the violence has created extreme levels of food shortages, and famine may soon have to be declared in other regions of South Kordofan too.
Around the country, nearly 25 million people, or about half the population, are facing crisis levels of food insecurity or severe hunger. 4.2 million of those are children under the age of 5. But it's not just conflict that is causing the shortages.
Taqwa fled from the city of Hejlij in West Kordofan, escaping fighting between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces. She also sought refuge in the same compound as Marasi, but she says there's little food for her to nurse her 3-week-old twins.
Feeding 2 infants is hard. I don't have enough money to buy meat, and I don't have enough money to buy flour and make porridge, and I can't work because the babies are still very young, and there's very little aid here, so we suffer.
The UN says those facing food shortages have dropped by 1 million compared to the year before, but aid organizations say they're facing funding cuts. And an economy weakened by war is making market prices hard for those already affected by the conflict, raising fears that soon the number of those in need will rise again. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Khartoum.
I take you for a quick look now to Washington, D.C. and the tarmac. You can see Britain's King Charles and Queen Camilla's plane has just touched down there in Washington, D.C. First state visit to the United States for the King. The UK government is hoping royal diplomacy can repair strained relations with Washington. Tensions, of course, have been brewing over Britain's refusal to join the US offensive against Iran. OK, let's now hand over to Al Jazeera's team in Washington, D.C. for our regular segment from the US Capitol. This is America, bringing you deeper insight into the debates shaping America and, of course, the world.
This is America and Washington, D.C., which isn't big on peace monuments. This is actually the only one explicitly called that in the whole of the capital. Here they prefer military victories. But peace, less heralded, negotiated peace, might actually be the best chance for President Trump to get out of this war quickly and on his own terms. But who are the angels of this peace who are going to deliver that for him? And what do we know about those he hopes can get the deal done? I'll have more on that later, but first, here's Cyril Varnier in our Washington studio.
John, thank you very much. When the U.S. president needs to flex his diplomatic muscle, as he does now, he doesn't call on diplomats. He calls on his longtime friend, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. In the last 15 months, he has tasked them with ending multiple wars in Ukraine, in Gaza, and now with Iran. And there's a late addition to that team, a man who didn't support this war, Vice President J.D. Vance. That trio, earlier this month, spent 20 hours across the table from Iran's negotiating team and then left without visible progress. So in a moment, we'll get to our chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher. He's at the White House for the very latest on the negotiation. Critics will say that Donald Trump putting his trust in.
As he pursues diplomacy with Iran, President Donald Trump is turning to a small, unconventional team split across two distinct camps. On one side, a senior cabinet member with growing influence. On the other, two longtime Trump insiders, trusted by the president, but not necessarily by Tehran. Let's start with J.D. Vance. He's a best-selling author, a former venture capitalist turned populist politician, now one of Trump's most prominent governing partners.
What we have now that we didn't have when the president took over just a little over a year ago is the ability to use every tool at our disposal to ensure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon.
Unlike some of Trump's other envoys, Vance has positioned himself as a skeptic of foreign intervention, a stance that resonates with parts of the Republican base. And some analysts say Iran may view Vance as a more pragmatic figure, someone potentially open to recalibrating U.S. policy rather than simply enforcing it. The second camp includes Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor, and real estate developer Steve Witkoff, a longtime confidant of the president. Both of these men have already been tapped to lead U.S. negotiations with Iran, though neither has delivered a breakthrough. Kushner played a key role in shaping Trump's Middle East strategy during his first term.
I don't need a history lesson, just I want a very simple thing. Here today in 2017, what's the outcome that you would accept?
He's widely seen as the architect of the Abraham Accords and remains a key voice on Middle East policy. Witkoff, meanwhile, brings negotiating experience but limited diplomatic credentials. His influence comes less from traditional statecraft and more from his personal relationship with Trump.
I have no doubt that we exhausted all efforts on behalf of a peaceful resolution, as you directed. Jared and I both agreed that the Iranians were there to buy time until a weaker president arrived.
At the same time, Vance, while politically more acceptable to Tehran, faces his own test, turning political positioning into tangible diplomatic progress. Together, this team reflects Trump's broader foreign policy approach, blending political loyalty, personal trust, and outsider instincts over conventional diplomacy. They have the ear of the president and the authority to strike a deal. What remains unclear is whether this diplomatic troika can move in sync, and whether that's enough to deliver a breakthrough with Iran. 2 tracks, 1 objective, and a negotiation where trust may prove harder to build than the deal itself. Manuel Rapalo, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Al Jazeera's chief U.S. correspondent Alan Fisher is at the White House. So, Alan, Donald Trump decided not to send his negotiators back to Islamabad, Pakistan, at the very last minute. In spite of that, is there still communication at the moment between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, publicly, things seem to be stalled. Certainly, there's no plans that we're hearing that there's any face-to-face negotiations planned. But behind the scenes, there's always a level of communication. And certainly, we understand the Pakistanis are keen to hear from both sides and try and find a way to bridge the differences. The differences include a change and a difference in negotiating style. The Iranians believe that Donald Trump is very reactive and impulsive. They believe that it's a much more measured approach they're negotiating, not just for now, but also for ongoing years to come. And they hope that any deal they make, the United States will stick to and agree to. Now, there's another problem as well. There's red lines. Donald Trump has very clear red lines, and that makes it difficult for the Pakistanis to try and get the United States and Iran round the table, because some things that the United States say they won't accept, Iran are very keen to negotiate on. Now, Donald Trump has said all the Iranians have to do is call. The Iranians say there's a framework there for further discussions. But at the moment, as I say, those discussions seem stalled and going nowhere for now.
Al Jazeera's Alan Fisher reporting from the White House. Thank you very much, Alan. So how's the current stalemate in negotiations playing out in the U.S. media? John Holman takes a closer look.
Thanks, Cyril. Reporting on Iran has been a bit muted over the last couple of days as the US media pivoted to the attack at the White House Correspondents' Dinner here at the Washington Hilton. But on Sunday, President Trump actually phoned into Fox News, as he's wont to do, to share his thoughts on the peace process and to explain why he cancelled the trip to Islamabad of his envoys, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Not worth an 18-hour flight, he said.
But we're going to do it by telephone. So if they want, they can call us. But again, they know what has to be in the agreement. Very simple. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. Otherwise, there's no reason to meet.
And the president said there's a deadline built in by US forces to make sure he gets what he wants, the blockade on Iran's oil. He shared a fairly visceral vision of what he thinks will happen when the country's pipelines get backed up with the black stuff.
What happens is that line explodes from within, both mechanically and in the earth. Something happens where it just explodes. And they say they only have about 3 days left before that happens.
So expect that on Wednesday. But what happens once and if Iran is brought to the table? There's been a lot of questions about his preferred negotiators. It's not working. Diplomats fear Trump's Iran envoys are making things worse, says this Time headline from 15th of April. It's talking about Kushner and Witkoff, respectively, the president's son-in-law and his friend, both of them real estate developers. They get an F in diplomacy, one former State Department negotiator told the magazine. Their faults in his eyes, inexpertise and inexperience. Add to that a trust deficit with Iran, according to Reuters, among others, after the US hit the country just after meetings with them this February. In the first round of talks, that distrust resulted in foreign war skeptic Vice President J.D. Vance heading to talks in Islamabad. But at the moment, neither he nor anyone else seems in danger of getting on a plane. And with that, the peace process too is idling on the tarmac.
Iran and the United States don't have formal diplomatic relations, so direct talks are extremely rare. In fact, there's only been one formal agreement between the two countries, and that's the Iran nuclear deal more than 10 years ago, also known, sometimes referred to as the JCPOA. That negotiation was headed by then Secretary of State John Kerry, a former senator who was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He had previous experience leading talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and he was instrumental in the ratification of a nuclear arms reduction treaty with Russia. And Kerry was backed by Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. He wasn't alone. Wendy Sherman had worked on the 1994 agreement for North Korea to freeze its nuclear weapons program, and after that, on secret negotiations to restrict Pyongyang's missile program. So both Kerry and Sherman had prior experience in high-level state-to-state negotiations. Now compare that to Trump's team and his three key negotiators right now. Steve Witkoff, decades-old friend of the president, as we said. His experience is in real estate, but recently he has been involved in direct talks to end the war in Ukraine and Israel's war on Gaza. Alongside him, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, another real estate developer, but has also worked on the Ukraine talks, the 2020 Abraham Accords, and the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And the very latest round of talks was led by Vice President J.D. Vance. That made the meeting in Pakistan, the highest level talks in nearly half a century between the U.S. and Iran. So to discuss all this, we're joined by Republican and political communications strategist John Feehery and former U.S. ambassador and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Gordon Gray. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us. I think the most common and easiest criticism of this current negotiating team chosen by Donald Trump, right, is that Witkoff and Kushner, as we just laid out, are not former diplomats. And so I was wondering, Ambassador, as a career diplomat, is that something that bothers you? Do you think that is a real problem when you're sending people to negotiate on behalf of the U.S. government with another state?
Not necessarily. I think they've got two things going in their favor. One is the fact that they've got the trust of the president, and one is the fact that they have instant access to the president. And those two are essential factors if you're going to be a successful negotiator. Senator George Mitchell did an excellent job negotiating the Good Friday Accords. So even as a former diplomat, I have to admit, you don't have to be a diplomat to negotiate successfully. Now, that doesn't mean that that they have all the skills necessary to do so. And I think that the lack of familiarity with the nuclear file is a crucial weakness that they have. I don't mean that critically. I'm not a nuclear expert. I bet you're not a nuclear expert. John Kerry wasn't a nuclear expert either, but he was smart enough and self-aware enough to bring nuclear experts with him to the negotiations.
John Feehery?
Yeah, obviously he knows more about this stuff than I do, but he's exactly right. If you don't know the terms that you're dealing with, you don't know the definitions, you don't know what the nuclear stuff is that you're trying to get out, and you don't have the right guys negotiating, and then it's very difficult. I think it's also very difficult to negotiate with the Iranians. I mean, they are not easy customers. They're going to walk out of the negotiations. They're going to do everything they can to delay this because they think by delay it helps them weaken the president. So I think that this team is a good team because they have the president's trust. I think they're completely unconventional. I think bringing J.D. Vance in, J.D. Vance is a very smart guy. He's probably intellectually smarter than anybody else in the administration. The question is, can he use those smarts to get a deal that is really acceptable to the American people?
But the question we're asking today really is this negotiating team suitable? So Witkoff, Kushner, Vance, and we mentioned Witkoff and Kushner don't have prior diplomatic experience. Ambassador Gray said that it's okay if they're not diplomats, but they do need the expertise. Both of you seeming to agree on the fact that, well, did they have the expertise or not to conduct these negotiations?
The number one thing they need is the president's trust, because ultimately is the president.
They have the president's trust.
Well, and so then they're acceptable. Absolutely, they're acceptable. And I think that they are.
But then the question is about, are they good negotiators, good for this job?
Well, Jared Kushner was pretty good to get the Abraham Accord, so he does have some. Witkoff has been working with Putin, trying to get a deal with the Russians, so he has some diplomatic experience there. I think the fact is we don't know how good they're going to be until they come up with an agreement, and we don't know how good the agreement is going to be. Is it worth for the American people to get involved themselves in this war? And ultimately, that's going to be a political question.
Ambassador Gray, you could make the kind of the counter argument of the usual criticism of Witkoff and Kushner, the counter argument being that in the last year and a half, certainly in Witkoff's case, he has accrued more face time with world leaders in high-level talks than maybe anyone else on the planet at this point. He's been meeting face-to-face with President Putin, with Ukrainian President Zelensky, with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with Israeli intelligence. The list goes on. He's been meeting in Qatar. He's been involved in so many high-level talks that at this point, maybe he has accrued the experience that you need for this.
I think the issue is not whether they have the experience or not. It's whether they have the expertise and whether they can deliver a deal. Yes, he's met with Putin several times. He's met with Putin without his own translator there, which is a grave mistake. And let's face it, he's fallen hook, line, and sinker for a lot of the Russian propaganda, a lot of Putin's talking points on Ukraine. I think he went into that negotiation thinking it was a real estate deal. It's not a real estate deal. It's an existential question for Ukraine and for President Zelensky, and it's also a much larger issue for President Putin than just who controls Donetsk or a few kilometers on the Russian-Ukrainian front.
And this war with Iran is also an existential question for them. I want to add a few things for our viewers' benefit to the wins and losses for both Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Despite having little prior experience of official government diplomacy, as we've discussed, Witkoff and Kushner have by now built up quite a few hours of face-to-face time with world leaders, and they do have some wins to their name. So arguably, the biggest for Kushner, and it's just been mentioned, was brokering the 2020 Abraham Accords. That saw the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain normalize diplomatic and commercial relations with Israel. The president's son-in-law also worked alongside Witkoff to lead negotiations for a ceasefire deal in Gaza, a deal that Israel has violated on a near-daily basis, killing hundreds of Palestinians since that deal was signed. Kushner and Witkoff are both executive members of the Board of Peace, the body which was created to oversee Gaza's redevelopment, but it has itself come in for criticism. They were also the ones leading indirect negotiations in Oman and Geneva before the U.S. went on to bomb Iran both times. In addition to all those talks, the pair have held direct but as yet unsuccessful negotiations with both the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, Ambassador Gray was just mentioning that, and with the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky. So at this point, Witkoff and Kushner, when they met with the Iranians, and J.D. Vance as well, it was well reported, and they said so publicly, that they were on the phone with Donald Trump some more than a dozen times. Do they have, who's negotiating here? Is it Donald Trump, or do they have some sort of wiggle room to put their imprint on this negotiation?
I personally think it's all about the president. And I think that the reason he has Witkoff and Kushner there is because they bring a business sensibility. And I think he's trying to develop a commercial relationship. And I think he's trying to do it in a way. I think this whole Board of Peace is an effort to try to get more business into Gaza and kind of bring kind of a business diplomacy. And I think that this is the president who's wrote a book called The Art of the Deal.
Before you get business into Gaza, you'd have to, Gaza would need to exist, which currently barely does.
Question. No, there's no question about that. But that's the vision that Trump had. How can I make money on this? How can we have a commercial? How can we have business in Gaza? That's the first thing he thinks about. And so I think from the perspective of having these two as his principal negotiators, is that's where they're coming at this. They're coming at from a business perspective, not necessarily from a diplomatic perspective. And I think that's why the president is directly involved in these talks.
So it's interesting you bring this up. In that case, let's hear how Steve Witkoff himself describes his negotiating strategy. This is how he talked about his approach to negotiations. Here he is speaking on the Tucker Carlson show.
I sit with the president and we talk often about what the end game is. Where does he want to get to? And once you decide where you want to get to, then it's all about tactically figuring out what that pathway is. Though there's no doubt I'm always trying to put myself in the shoes of the other person, because a good deal has to work for everybody.
Okay, so you heard Witkoff, Ambassador Gray, saying, I try to put myself in the other party's shoes, see what they want, and whether I can get that for them. Do you think that works in the context of this Iran negotiation?
I think it works in any negotiation. If you don't understand where your opposite number in the negotiation is coming from, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. It's going to make it that much more difficult. What troubled me in that clip that we just saw is Mr. Witkoff saying he sits with the president and gets his strategic guidance. It would be wonderful for the American people if the president shared what his strategic objectives were, because they continually shift over time, and they shift depending on which voice in the administration is speaking.
Are Witkoff and Kushner the right people to put across the table from Iran, given that each time Iran has negotiated with them, they've been bombed? Doesn't that argue in favor of maybe change the team?
I don't think it necessarily argues in favor of changing it, but I think it was probably a smart move to add Vice President Vance to it, who, by all the reports I saw, was specifically requested by the Iranian side.
Or you could make the counter-argument that that is the very reason why Donald Trump actually keeps them in the team, because they bring, their mere presence brings the very credible threat of further military action.
Listen, Witkoff and Kushner are extraordinarily close to Israel. And I think that that's one of the reasons why they're there. And clearly the vice president is someone who is very apprehensive about going into this war in the first place, which is why the Iranians want him in the negotiation. But he's also very highly ranking. So, I mean, from a diplomatic standpoint, but also from a prestige standpoint, getting the vice president to do the face-to-face talks. And I would make one other point. People talk about the unconventional approach, but this is the first time we've had face-to-face negotiations in a half a century. Good on Trump for doing that. I mean, this is...
Well, no, the JCPOA.
Well, those were not face-to-face. I mean...
They negotiated for a month and a half, or excuse me, for a year and a half, with the full thrust of the U.S. government.
But the vice president was not meeting with them personally. So this is the big deal of what they've done here. And I think that this covers the whole range here with both the vice president and with these two, Witkoff and Kushner, who are very close to Israel.
So since you mentioned J.D. Vance, let's listen to what Donald Trump had to say, half jokingly, I have to admit. You may have heard this before. Let's listen to what the president said about J.D. Vance and sending him to the talks in Islamabad, Pakistan.
So if it doesn't happen, I'm blaming J.D. Vance. If it does happen, I'm taking full credit.
Okay, I was just wondering your reading of that moment. It's half in jest, half a joke, but half not a joke.
It's true.
Okay.
I mean, Trump's going to take credit if it's a success, and if it fails, he's going to blame somebody else, because that's how he operates. Am I right about that? I think.
Ambassador.
Agree completely.
Yeah. Why send J.D. Vance then, in your view, to the negotiation, given that he already had a tandem, a duo that he was happy with?
I think there are a few reasons. One reason is, as I just said, the Iranians apparently signaled that they wanted him at the table. And as you pointed out, their last two rounds of negotiations with Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner ended up in them being bombed. So I think that's the first reason. I think the second reason, and John's probably better placed to address this than I am, but I think the second reason is, let's face it, President Trump is prosecuting an unpopular war. It's particularly divisive for his base, who thought they were electing a president who had promised no new wars, and that's not what they delivered. By sending the most prominent member of the administration identified with the anti-interventionist wing, I think he helps shore up his base.
What does this do for J.D. Vance in the perspective of the next presidential run, 2028? He's one of the names, obviously, one of the people as the vice president, possibly the most obvious candidate to represent the Republicans.
Well, first of all, it gives him great experience. The ability to be in part of really high-level negotiations, to sit there 20 hours with an implacable enemy. For him, this is good for the resume. But also, I think...
It's only good if he actually delivers a deal.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think that ultimately the experiences last a lifetime. And I also think that as someone who's well known as being kind of against this war, if he can get us out of this war, that'll make the MAGA folks who do not like this war. I mean, the MAGA movement's pretty split, but most people are very uncomfortable with what we've done here. And if the president really did kind of campaign on the idea he'd keep us out of unpopular wars. So if Vance can get us out of this war, that will really kind of make him a hero to the MAGA movement.
Ambassador, you think this is a win for J.D. Vance, ultimately?
I think it's a win if he brings home a settlement, and I think it's a loss for his presidential aspirations if it goes belly up.
I want to thank our guests today for joining us. Republican and political communication strategist John Feehery and former U.S. Ambassador and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Gordon Gray. Thank you very much to both of you for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in particular have been under the social media microscope for their roles in this negotiation, as we've discussed, and many in the public arena asking whether they are the right men for the job. Alex Beard has more.
Democratic Senator Chris Murphy lit the fuse online with this. His damning review of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Two negotiators, no diplomatic experience, and in way over their heads. The clapback, just as fast. Supporters trying to correct Murphy, reminding him that Kushner was key in negotiating the Abraham Accords in 2020, that series of Israeli normalization agreements with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. But conservative journalist Peter Laffin is flipping that script, saying the experience can only mean empty credentials awarded to mediocrities of no achievement. More of those Lego AI videos doing the rounds, claiming Kushner's marriage to the president's daughter is the only thing that got him here. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald saying, why would Iran want to deal with Kushner, who they see as a supporter of Israel, or with Witkoff, who they see as unsuitable? This 60 Minutes interview with Kushner last year doing the rounds once again.
What people call conflicts of interest, Steve and I call experience and trusted relationships.
Adam Cochran's breakdown saying this is all pretty simple and that the choice of negotiators sends a clear message to Tehran. No chance of a deal, send Witkoff and Kushner. Low chance with possible humiliation, send Vice President J.D. Vance. High chance of a good outcome, but still some talking needed, send Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And a done deal, send President Donald Trump.
And that is all from the team here out of our Washington studio. Today we've been looking at the people who make up Donald Trump's trusted team of negotiators and what they're expected to achieve in diplomatic talks with Iran. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the United States and influence the rest of the world. If you want to catch up on this episode or previous ones, head to our website, aljazeera.com, or check out our YouTube channel. John Holman looks ahead to our next show.
On the next edition of This Is America, at this time of neither peace nor war, we'll be focusing what this stalemate will cost the US and Iran until they reach a deal. That's Tuesday at 18:30 GMT or 14:30 Eastern. Bye for now.
The latest news as it breaks.
All eyes were on Germany and Italy. They decided that the pact with Israel should remain in place.
And in-depth reports.
They're struggling to even find anything, and the situation has been made worse because of the Middle East conflict.
From around the world.
Inside this small therapy room in northern Gaza, therapists are trying to help children find their voices again.
This is a masterclass on colonization.
It's very interesting to look at the relationship between French ideology and the reality of often economic exploitation.
Take a look inside the colonial playbook.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. A lot of different French actors are denigrating Islam and trying to pinpoint Islam as a source of the backwardness of the local population.
Al Jazeera untangles. Lesson 2, French Empire, civilizing mission.
This story that really captured the attention of so many people around the world is now reaching this tragic of the missing Titan. What happens here in the agricultural heartland of America can directly affect food prices in various parts of the world.
Tom McRae. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our continuing coverage of the developments out of Iran, Lebanon and the US. Coming up.
The proposal was being discussed. I don't want to get ahead of the president or his national security team. What I will reiterate is that the president's red lines with respect to Iran have been made very, very clear, not just to the American public, but also to them as well.
The White House says it's analysing an Iranian proposal that could bring about an end to the war. Iran's top diplomat meets Vladimir Putin. Abbas Araghchi says Tehran is looking at a request from the US for talks. Fears of a return to war in Lebanon, Israel expands its attacks on the south. Hezbollah vows to retaliate. And Britain's King Charles arrives in the US for a state visit, but it's a trip that's being overshadowed by the war in Iran. The White House has confirmed that an Iranian proposal to end the war is under discussion. Carolyn Levitt says while it's being considered, Washington's red lines remain in place.
I will confirm the president has met with his national security team this morning. The meeting may be ongoing, maybe not. I don't want to speak affirmatively because I was prepping to come out here, but the proposal was being discussed. I don't want to get ahead of the president or his national security team. What I will reiterate is that the president's red lines with respect to Iran have been made very, very clear, not just to the American public, but also to them as well.
Ali Hashim is live in Tehran for us. But first, we're going to speak to Ellen Fisher, who is standing by at the White House. Ellen, the Iranian proposal's under discussion there. Do we know who's actually looking at it and when maybe we could get a response?
Well, to be clear, this is a meeting of the national security team with Donald Trump. That would include the likes of Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. J.D. Vance is sometimes involved in that, and the head of the likes of the CIA. Now, it's not just the Iranian proposal that will be discussed. Everything going on around the war will be discussed. And of course, Donald Trump could well make a decision that means either the ceasefire ends and the bombing resumes, or they are going to move to the next stage of talks. It's not simply just a case of the only thing on the table being the Iranian proposal. But as Caroline Levitt made very clear, there are red lines for the United States, and they won't entertain talks unless the Iranians are serious about discussing the fact that Donald Trump does not want them to have a nuclear weapon, not now, not ever. Obviously, other issues to be discussed, but we're seeing no signs publicly that the talks are anything other than stalemated. There's no intention that we can gather that there are face-to-face talks being planned. One of the problems, of course, is the difference in negotiating styles. The Iranians believe that Donald Trump is trying to bully them into an agreement which they don't think is acceptable. They believe that he is reactive and very much impulsive, and that's not something that they are willing to consider. So Donald Trump has been in the Oval Office. He's not there at the moment, but the Iranian proposal may just be one of the things that are being discussed by Donald Trump and his national security team.
OK, thank you so much, Ellen. As always, Ellen Fisher for us there at the White House. Iran's top diplomat says Tehran is considering a request from Washington for talks. Abbas Araghchi made the comments on social media after he met Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. He said negotiations have stalled because of what he called Washington's destructive habits, unreasonable demands and frequent changes in position. During the meeting, Putin pledged to support to ensure peace returns to the Middle East.
We are now considering.
Ali Hashim is standing by for us in Tehran. And Ellen, do we know where Abbas Araghchi is actually going to go next and what that could potentially tell us?
Well, given the prior announcement by the Iranian Foreign Ministry that the tour will take Araghchi from Pakistan to Oman to Russia, it's most probably that Abbas Araghchi will be back in Tehran this evening or tomorrow in the morning. We don't have a clear schedule for him, but what we know is that he should be in Tehran by the coming hours. And given that, of course, he'll be briefing his leadership here on the discussions, whether with the Pakistani officials or the Omani Sultan, or the Russian president. This was a high-profile visit where the foreign minister met leaders of 3 countries and conveyed messages from his leadership, from Ayatollah Mustafa Khamenei to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Of course, it comes at a very sensitive time when everyone is waiting to see what's going to be the next phase of the Iran-US-Israel conflict. Now, given the fact that the Iranians placed on the table a kind of a proposal, now we're hearing that the United States is studying this proposal. It's clear that we are on a crossroads, either given actually the situation already very tense in the seas, and at the same time ceasefire is approaching once again from a decisive decision, just that President Trump said that it's not going to be extended or it's not going to be given more time. So everyone is waiting to see whether this is going to be a moment where everyone is going to witness a new round of negotiations with completely new priorities, or the war might start again.
Okay, thank you so much, Ali. Ali Hashim for us there in Tehran. Well, King Charles and Queen Camilla have just arrived in the US for a state visit. It comes as US-UK relations are strained by the war in Iran, with Trump slamming Prime Minister Keir Starmer's refusal to assist the US militarily. We're going to go back to Ellen Fisher now, who's at the White House. Ellen, can you just talk us through exactly what is planned for the visit and just how sensitive this is diplomatically, given the tensions between the US and the UK at the moment?
Well, the British side will make it clear that the King is above politics. He's the head of the country. He is not the head of the government. He appoints the Prime Minister after democratic elections. Now, he may well raise in private moments with Donald Trump some of his own personal concerns, but what is clear is that he may not speak for the government. These things are planned well in advance, and so it's not really a reaction to anything, whether it is Donald Trump's disdain for Keir Starmer or what he feels is the lack of British support for the war in Iran. Donald Trump has made it clear that the King is his guest, that he likes the way that he's been treated by the royal family when he has been in the UK, and he wanted to return the favour. And of course, King Charles is here because it's the 25th anniversary of US independence from the British. So he's got 4 days of events here in the United States. He may well raise in private moments like Canada. Donald Trump has said a few things about Canada. Remember, King Charles is also the head of state for Canada as well. So that would be significant. He may well raise in private Donald Trump's criticism of the UK government. But the British side are determined to make the point that no country has been a greater ally to the United States, and no country has been at the US's side more than the United Kingdom.
OK, thank you so much, Ellen. No doubt we will be keeping a very close eye on developments there in the White House once Prince Charles and Queen Camilla, King Charles and Queen Camilla arrive. Ellen Fisher at the White House. We're going to go back to our US-Iran story. We can speak to Henry Ensher, who is a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and former US Ambassador. He joins us from San Diego. Thanks so much for being with us. As we know, Donald Trump is having a briefing from his national security team, or has had one, at the White House in the last couple of hours to discuss Iran's latest proposal and where things stand. What do you think will be top of that agenda?
I think the top of the agenda has to be reopening the Strait of Hormuz. That's the most urgent, and it's one of the most important. That closure is damaging the global economy. More importantly, from the U.S. perspective, it's doing real harm to the U.S. economy, with more to come. So I'm certain that's the top of mind thing. And then the second thing that comes up, again, is the nuclear issue. And there you have really two issues. On the one hand, you have the question of nuclear weapons, and then you have the question of how do you get to nuclear weapons, and that's enrichment. So it will be difficult, I think, going forward to settle the question, the nuclear questions, easier to get to the Strait of Hormuz, I think, as long as both parties can agree that it's in their interest to have that strait open that both will be served best if that happens.
Okay, the latest proposal by Iran to basically split things at the moment to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and then deal with the nuclear issue at a later date. Do you think that Donald Trump's going to go for that?
I suspect at the end, that's where it'll end up, right? There will be an opening of the strait. They'll work on how to do that exactly, what the timing of it will be. And then they'll agree, I suspect, to put the nuclear negotiations on a different time frame. Frankly, there is just no way to deal with all the technical issues in a week or 2 or 3. That will not happen. But the strait is more amenable to a quicker solution. That's where I think we're going to end up.
But doesn't that hand Iran the leverage yet again if the US removes its naval blockade without actually getting a guarantee that Iran won't continue its nuclear program?
So that is the thing, is that it is a strategic success for Iran to have the strait reopened, to remove the blockade, if you will. The U.S. can always reimpose a blockade, but opening the strait without any conditions would be a strategic victory for Iran. No way to soft pedal that, but I think the Americans will find it necessary to do that, given the damage that's being done to the economy right now. That's one thing. Second thing is, you pointed out the importance of the King Charles visit. Even more important, with all due respect, is the upcoming visit by Donald Trump to China, and they will want nothing to interfere with that.
Obviously, it's very difficult to predict what Donald Trump might do next, but if he rejects this latest proposal, then what happens?
So nothing is ever rejected, is it, right? It's always no, but, or it's yes, but, right? So even if the president says, no, we can't do business on this basis, I think what he'll say is, but there is enough here to be worthy of discussion. And I suspect that American representatives will be making the long trip out to Pakistan or elsewhere to continue negotiations. Meanwhile, the violence will continue in abeyance, at least as between the U.S. And Iran. Lebanon and elsewhere are different questions, but I suspect that this will be enough to at least stop the violence.
OK, thank you so much. That is Henry Ensher, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, as well as former US Ambassador. Thanks so much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Well, the man accused of storming into the White House Correspondents' Dinner is being charged with the attempted assassination of US President Donald Trump. Cole Allen will be formally charged for using a firearm in a violent crime and assaulting a federal officer. Police are reviewing a manifesto believed to be linked to the suspect.
As you know, I was seated next to President Trump and the First Lady when the shots were fired before Secret Service swiftly moved us to safety backstage. The president's calm in the face of chaos, while yet another individual was trying to take his life, was really remarkable to witness. We can and we should have fierce disagreement in this country. As you all know, we disagree often, myself in this role and all of you in the news media. But those disagreements must remain peaceful. Debating, peaceful protesting, and voting are how we need to settle disagreements, not bullets.
Courage and professionalism of law enforcement. The officers who responded without hesitation and did their jobs as they were trained to do. Secret Service agents promptly tackled and detained the suspect, Cole Thomas Allen. The president and all the protectees and participants at the dinner were safe. One brave officer was injured and is receiving care and has been released from the hospital. I want to make this clear. This man was a floor above the ballroom with hundreds of federal agents between him and the President of the United States. The Department of Justice approaches incidents like this with urgency, and clarity of purpose. Violence has no place in civic life. It cannot and will not be used to disrupt democratic institutions or intimidate those who serve them, and it certainly cannot continue to be used against the President of the United States. We are investigating this matter fully. We will apply the law fairly, and we will ensure that accountability is swift and certain. But we also should recognize what did not happen. Law enforcement did not fail. They did exactly what they are trained to do. This was not an accident. It was the result, as we know now, of preparation. But the men and women who protected us that night were trained, professional, and had an enduring commitment to the rule of law. Today, the Department of Justice filed 3 federal charges in United States District Court against Cole Thomas Allen. The first count is attempted assassination of the President of the United States. This count is punishable by up to life in prison. The second count is interstate transportation of a firearm to commit a felony. This is punishable by up to 10 years in prison. And the third count is discharge of a firearm during a crime of violence, which is punishable by a mandatory minimum term of imprisonment of 10 years, a maximum of life, and the 10 years is consecutive to any other sentence imposed. Just to go through very quickly the timeline, which many of you in this room already know. The defendant, Allen, made a hotel reservation at the Washington Hilton for April 24th through April 26th. On April 21st of this year, he traveled by train from Los Angeles to Chicago and then from Chicago to Washington, D.C. On April 24th, he arrived in Washington, D.C. at approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon and checked into the Washington Hilton. Approximately at 8:40 on the night of April 25th, Allen approached a security checkpoint on the terrace level of the hotel, which is again a floor above where the dinner was taking place. He ran through the magnetometer holding a long gun. As he did so, U.S. Secret Service personnel assigned to the checkpoint heard a loud gunshot. One Secret Service officer was shot in the chest, but was wearing a ballistic vest that worked. This heroic officer who was hit fired 5 times at Allen, who was not shot, but fell to the ground and was promptly arrested. I want to thank everybody who worked tirelessly on Saturday, Sunday, and continuing today. This includes members of the FBI, and Director Patel is going to address that in a minute. It includes members of the Metropolitan Police Department who were immediately on the scene, the chief, the mayor, to make sure that law enforcement was available to do their jobs and had all the tools they needed to do so. And lastly, the United States Attorney's Office here in D.C., our U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro and her team. A prosecutor stayed up all night long, didn't sleep all day yesterday, making sure that we got what we needed from all over the country. It included search warrants in California, search warrants here in D.C., multiple interviews that have been conducted already of witnesses and of family members of the charged individual, and continue to work hard today. This investigation is ongoing. It's not complete. A lot of the information that the media is hearing through leaks or sources, some of it is true, some of it is not true, and at the right time, you will hear information from us as appropriate. I'd like to ask our U.S. Attorney, Jeanine Pirro, to say a few words, and then followed by Director Patel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Cole Allen's journey of accountability in the criminal justice system starts today. Todd Blanche just indicated to you the charges. Those charges are only 3 charges that are in the complaint that has been presented in federal district court about an hour ago. There will be additional charges as this investigation continues to unfold. But make no mistake, this was an attempted assassination of the President of the United States, with the defendant making clear what his intent was. And that intent was to bring down as many of the high-ranking cabinet officials as he could. This is the kind of situation that we cannot tolerate. And as the Attorney General has just indicated, it could have been so much worse, but for the reality that we had the Secret Service, as well as the Metropolitan Police Department and the FBI. Now, the facts make it very clear what this intent was. You may recall that it was on March 2nd that the president indicated that he would be attending this public event at the Hilton. And on April 6th, that's when Cole Allen first made a hotel reservation at the Washington Hilton for 3 nights, the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th. It was on April 21st that he traveled all the way from the West Coast, from his home near L.A. He gets to Chicago on April 23rd, and has been indicated he arrives in D.C. on the 24th, and he checks into the hotel at about 3 p.m. He stays overnight. He is very much aware that the president and the first lady entered the ballroom at 8 p.m. And it was at 8:40 that he made a decision to rush the ballroom. And thank goodness, law enforcement, the Secret Service.
Well, that is an update from the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney Janine Pirro there on the assassination attempt on President Donald Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday. They reiterated that law enforcement did not fail. They did exactly what they were trained to do, and said that the investigation is ongoing and more charges against Cole Allen, the suspect in this, will follow, who's already been charged with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Well, moving on, the Israeli military and Iran-backed Lebanese armed group Hezbollah are trading fire despite a US-brokered ceasefire. An initial 10-day pause in fighting was recently extended by 3 weeks, but Hezbollah wasn't part of those talks between Israel and the Lebanese government and has called the truce meaningless. Now, on the ground in southern Lebanon, Israeli strikes have killed at least 2 people. That brings the death toll to 22 just over the weekend. Hezbollah's leader, Naim Qassem, reiterated that the group rejects direct negotiations with Israel. He says the talks only benefit, quote, the enemy, and that the group will never give up arms, which is one of Israel's main demands. Thousands of people have fled their homes because of the violence. Malcolm Webb visited a shelter in the city of Sidon.
The people running this displacement shelter in a school in the city of Sidon in southern Lebanon say that since the start of March, they hosted most of 1,000 people staying in tents or staying in the school classrooms. But they say most of them went home since the ceasefire over the last 10 days. But in the last couple of days, that's all changed following a surge of Israeli airstrikes across the south. They say hundreds of them have come back, and now it's full of families once again who'd hoped for a return to normality, but their hopes have been dashed. On Sunday, Israel's military told people to leave several villages north of the Litani River, far from the area it occupies by the border, and then bombed them. In one of them, Khadija Hashem says she'd been trying to rebuild her life.
There were many aircraft overhead, and then they struck a village, one they previously said was safe. About half an hour later, they struck again. People didn't have enough time to evacuate. There was panic. Cars were lining up on the roads. Then the road itself was hit. Many civilians were killed. It seemed like indiscriminate fire.
The US announced a 3-week extension to the ceasefire last week. The governments of Lebanon and Israel are due to hold talks. None of it has helped people here.
We lost trust in Israel, like they don't respect, ceasefire. They don't respect, human beings. Though they shoot. Whatever the result is, who's being targeted, nobody knows. What I can see in my own eyes, they're targeting people. Civilians are getting killed.
The Israeli army says it targets Hezbollah's fighters. In the area it now occupies, it's been blowing up entire towns. Huda Haurani told us her parents' home was destroyed. She says she returned to her village last week, but had to flee Israeli airstrikes.
Hezbollah did not break the truce.
The Israeli army violated it first by striking civilians and destroying homes. They speak about a yellow line, but this is all our land, and we will take it back.
The children who normally attend this school aren't studying at the moment. Neither are children from villages in the south which have been destroyed, blown up by Israeli demolitions. Neither are those from villages which are currently being bombed. And all the people we've spoken to here who've been displaced for the second time in less than 2 months say that in their view there is no ceasefire because it's not safe for them to go home. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Sidon, Lebanon.
Mali's military junta has announced 2 days of national mourning after coordinated attacks killed the country's defence minister on Saturday. The attacks, carried by several armed groups, attacked locations across Mali, including Bamako, as well as Gao and Kidal in the north and the central city of Savaa. Mali's defence minister, General Sadio Kamara, was killed when his residence came under attack. He was a central figure in the military government and instrumental in strengthening ties with Russia. Well, in the occupied West Bank, the Israeli army has stormed the northern city of Nablus and Kalandia refugee camp. Israeli forces raided and searched several homes in the latest escalation in the occupied territory. Nablus is one of the main cities in northern West Bank where the Israeli military has carried out near daily incursions. Well, global military spending has hit a record $2.9 trillion, marking 11 straight years of growth. As major powers like the US, China and Russia ramp up budgets, Europe is also increasing budgets in response to the war in Ukraine. Audrey McAlpine reports from Kyiv.
We're walking through a world that's spending more on war than ever before. New data shows that global military spending hit $2.9 trillion last year. That's a record high, and it's 11 straight years of growth. The United States still leads, spending about $954 billion, but others are catching up. China spent $336 billion, Russia around $190 billion, and Germany saw one of the biggest increases in Europe. These 5 countries alone make up more than half of global military spending. Across Europe, spending jumped sharply due to the war in Ukraine. And Ukraine itself now ranks 7th in the world, spending over $84 billion. That's around 40% of its economy. So this isn't just more spending, it's a world rearming as wars across the globe continue and the risk of new ones grows. Audrey McAlpine, Al Jazeera, Kyiv.
In Sudan, 3 years of war have severely disrupted access to food and life-saving aid. Millions are starving. Famine was declared in some regions, largely due to sieges by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. And as Hibbert Morgan reports, there's no respite from hunger, even for those fleeing to the capital, Khartoum.
This is where Marasi Al-Fadil and her children came to seek safety. There's not much here. An incomplete building in a compound in Durman, in Sudan's capital, Khartoum. They fled from the city of El Fasher 6 months ago. She escaped from a siege imposed by the Rapid Support Forces as they moved to take control of the city. Marasi says hunger made her leave just days before the paramilitary group overran El Fasher.
The siege made life hard. Goods could not come in. Anyone who attempted to bring in food was detained or killed. And there was daily shelling, so we couldn't even go to the market. And if we did, things were very expensive because of the siege.
The siege on El Fasher lasted 18 months before the RSF took full control last October. It created a hunger crisis so severe the UN declared famine. Famine was also declared in Kordofan and in North Darfur and in Kadugli in South Kordofan, also because of an RSF siege there and several other areas. The UN says its inability to reach those in need because of the violence has created extreme levels of food shortages, and famine may soon have to be declared in other regions of South Kordofan too. Around the country, nearly 25 million people, or about half the population, are facing crisis levels of food insecurity or severe hunger. 4.2 million of those are children under the age of 5. But it's not just conflict that is causing the shortages. Taqwa fled from the city of Hijlij in West Kordofan, escaping fighting between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces. She also sought refuge in the same compound as Merasi, but she says there's little food for her to nurse her 3-week-old twins.
Feeding 2 infants is hard. I don't have enough money to buy meat, and I don't have enough money to buy flour and make porridge, and I can't work because the babies are still very young, and there's very little aid here, so we suffer.
The UN says those facing food shortages have dropped by 1 million compared to the year before, but aid organizations say they're facing funding cuts, and an economy weakened by war is making market prices hard for those already affected by the conflict, raising fears that soon the number of those in need will rise again. Al Jazeera, Khartoum.
High oil prices driven by the Middle East conflict are increasing global demand for biodiesel. Suppliers are looking for fuel substitutes that can bypass the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has largely blocked for 7 weeks. Patrick Falk reports from Hong Kong.
While diners eat out at the front of this restaurant, a slick operation is going on at the back.
Yes.
Once a week, Jack Young comes to collect the used cooking oil. It's taken out and loaded onto a lorry before it's poured into a plastic vat, ready to be transported away.
At restaurants where they fry a lot, there's definitely more oil. Normal restaurants will fill about 2 or 3 cans a week.
The used cooking oil, you see it, known in the industry, is delivered to this production plant, where it's chemically treated and turned into biodiesel, with biodegradable fuel. The conflict in the Middle East has caused a spike.
Oh my gosh, your beard is gone. Why do you look so good? You look so weird now.
Jack Young is part of the sales team. Says inquiries are pouring in.
We do see buyers and users starting to consider if biofuel is actually a better option for them right now with the fluctuating diesel market. So before it would be a premium alternative, now it would almost be a replaceable alternative.
The bulk of the biodiesel we trust here is shipped to Europe. Demand is fueled by stringent government targets to cut emissions. But energy supply disruptions does prompt several countries in Asia to rethink their reliance on oil imports.
Asia buys about 80% of the oil that's shipped through the Strait of Hormuz, so the region's been heavily impacted by its closure. So what we're seeing now is several countries, including Indonesia, Malaysia, and others, raising and accelerating biofuel mandates to help absorb the shock.
Energy security may be driving the market for now, but to sustain growth, the biofuel industry will need to find ways to scale up production while lowering costs. Patrick Falk, Al Jazeera, Hong Kong.
Our coverage of the war between the US, Israel and Iran continues after Al Jazeera untangles, which is up next. Stay with us.
How can there be such a fundamental discrepancy on such a core issue?
Each side will stick to the deal only as long as it benefits that side.
This war did start in the middle of negotiations.
They need to agree on principles. President Trump wants this to end. That's going to be very hard.
The top 1% is benefiting. The question is, who might have had some insider information? Upfront tackles the big issues on Al Jazeera.
France dreamed big. Not just of borders, but of belonging. Empire for them wasn't just territory, it was a mirror. The colonies would reflect the Republic back to itself. In French, of course.
French public memory of the colonial period is of the civilizing mission.
The idea of spreading civilization was really a way to unify people in France in a kind of patriotic way behind the idea of colonial expansion.
But there was also, from the more Republican side of French politics, the argument that in some way France was a superior culture and that people would be better off ruled by the French.
Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Except, funny thing, those words don't always travel well.
Within the first few decades of colonization, we believe that upwards of 1 million Algerians perished as a result of the violence of conquest, and also as a result of expropriation of land.
Wait, I thought the French Empire was about freedom. Yes, freedom. To become French, or at least almost French. Or to be told you're French until the paperwork says otherwise. Like an exchange student? Except no exchange, and no return ticket. That doesn't make any sense. Precisely. So sharpen your pens and conjugate your verbs. Welcome to... Reality check. The French Empire was one of the biggest empires on Earth, stretching across Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. It exported French language, schools, and law as civilization, while ruling millions of people who had limited control over their own future. The borders, wars, and migrations that came out of that empire still shape today's France, and a lot of the world, long after the tricolor came down. That's what we're exploring today. How France tried to turn difference into Frenchness, and what that did to the people who never got to choose. In 1885, French statesman Jules Ferry stood before Parliament and said the quiet part out loud. Superior races have a right because they have a duty. The duty to civilize inferior races.
It was a very paradoxical concept. Certainly, we don't oftentimes think today of colonialism as being liberating, but that is very much what the French believed. They believed that their values that came out of the Enlightenment could do just that.
They called it la mission civilisatrice, the civilizing mission, a convenient blend of Enlightenment ideals and economic strategy.
By civilizing people, they meant to spread ideas like liberty, political freedom, economic rationality, capitalism, essentially.
The French model was very much one of, as it were, projecting French culture. And that projection included French language, it included educating as many people as possible, definitely the elite.
Unlike other empires obsessed with loot, France wanted loyalty, hearts, minds, and mouths pronouncing bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Bonjour.
Wait, he just sold colonialism like it's a self-help course. Should I be taking notes? Yes, and yes. Liberty, now with exceptions. See subsection 12C. Exhibit A, Senegal's 4 communes. Saint-Louis, Dakar, Gorée, Rufisque. In 1848, Paris extended French citizenship there, in theory. However, most Africans were labeled originaires, citizens who still fell under Islamic or customary law, a loophole dressed as inclusion.
The reality on the ground was that rights were oftentimes denied, in fact, most times denied to colonial subjects. Colonial subjects oftentimes had no pathway really to citizenship.
Only a small educated elite, the évolué, could climb the ladder to full citizenship, but the price was steep.
You had to give up the idea of Islamic law, for example, to accept French secular law. This, I think, created quite a bit of resentment on the part of many colonized subjects.
They have to renounce their right to be judged in a Muslim court, even though the Muslim courts are under French jurisdiction, in order to actually potentially get citizenship, which very few do, beginning in 1865 with the personal status laws.
Sounds like equality existed, just not for the people it was promised to.
Bureaucracy makes a great disguise for inequality.
Our cameraman in the French West African port of Dakar sends back a record of present-day life in that important place.
Assimilation came packaged as education. Language first, then loyalty.
All education during the colonial period was in French, and French is the official language now of all France's former colonies in sub-Saharan Africa.
And you can still see that to an extent in modern France, in that the surviving French colonies, places like Réunion, Martinique, Guadeloupe, are represented in the French Chambre des Députés. They're actually, as it were, France.
There was great pride that came to many that people were, in theory, learning French, learning the French language, learning French culture. The reality on the ground, however, remained quite blurry.
In Indochina, children copied French dictation while local scripts were sidelined. In Africa, classrooms preached loyalty to Marianne over local religious and communal identities.
Schools are dismantled for chronic Arabic or classical Arabic under the French regime, so Arabic kind of falls aside as a language.
To be fair, contemporaries pointed to gains. Mastering French opened jobs as clerks, teachers, and lawyers, people who could move between the colony and the metropole.
Some of them actually became ministers in French governments during the Fourth Republic between 1946 and 1958.
From those benches came figures like Léopold Senghor, poet and later president of Senegal. Legal pathways, however narrow, allowed figures like Blaise Diagne to win election to the French Chamber in 1914, the first black African deputy. Once language rewrote the mind, the next frontier was the soul.
The French in West Africa, parts of West Africa, and in Algeria in particular, had a very uncomfortable relationship with Islam.
Launch your online store with hosting
Islam as a religion. A lot of different French actors, ethnographers, state officials, military officials, artists, and once again even feminists are writing about and are denigrating Islam and trying to pinpoint Islam as a source of the backwardness of the local population.
Islam in Algeria was administered by the colonial state. Imams licensed, religious courts constrained.
In Algeria, we have this legal system that is extremely repressive towards Algerian Muslims. It is basically this system of exceptionalism that basically the laws that apply to Europeans do not apply to the Algerian Muslim majority.
So if you pray the wrong way or learn in the wrong place, you're suspicious?
Bingo. Your beliefs are a security issue, not just a spiritual one.
And the French get to say, we're not repressing you, we're just organizing society.
Reform, public order, civilization, nice words for a system that declares which lives are guided and which are disposable. In Indochina, Buddhist institutions were sidelined in favor of French schools.
Repression and reform were combined in French policy. Repression was used, for example, in Madagascar in 1947. Something like 180,000 to 100,000 Madagascans were killed there.
These ceremonies were propaganda, unveiling as liberation, French values as modernity. But behind the optics was a war being fought in villages, prisons, and streets.
So those are the kinds of things that French people like to remember. Africans, on the other hand, remember different things. They remember, for example, the repression to which they were periodically subject. They remember the denial of rights, of equal rights. They remember France's reluctance to make good on its promises of the one and indivisible republic with shared rights and equality.
Still, it wasn't all one-way repression. French secular ideals and Catholic networks did create new social spaces.
You also actually see how empire, however much it's a system of control, also gives agency to those people who are ruled or controlled or incorporated, or whatever phrase you wish to use.
Mission schools educated women who later became activists. Some Algerian reformists used French rhetoric about liberty to challenge patriarchy at home.
So Algerian Muslim women had been talking about, or there was sort of discourse about rights, and actually they looked more in terms of improving women's condition in the interwar period.
Religion and culture weren't just collateral, they were battlegrounds. Still, every awakening has a budget. Once minds were molded, the next project was profit. Empire needed cash crops, quotas, and bodies to move them. Cotton, coffee, cocoa, peanuts, rubber, grown for Paris, not for local markets.
It's very interesting to look at the relationship between French ideology and a reality of often economic exploitation, and obviously economic exploitation in all sorts of different ways, from coerced labour to the, as it were, seizure of raw materials.
The recruitment of labor was oftentimes achieved through violent means, either through directly forcing men and women to work at gunpoint, say, or through threats of taxation or even kidnapping, forcing men to come forward and agree to work, through systems of indentured labor.
By law, adults could be conscripted for weeks at a time. Projects like the Congo-Ocean Railway cost tens of thousands of African lives.
How bureaucracy functioned oftentimes was that it could create its own kind of rationale by saying, well, obviously there's not any kind of, say, mistreatment of labor. Laborers are not housed poorly. Laborers are not forced into
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has...
When they can just simply point to the rules and regulations that say that those things were impossible. In reality, however, these sorts of abuses were going on with some regularity.
To some contemporaries, this looked like progress. Railways did connect coasts to interiors. Export crops brought wages for a minority who found steady work. Cities like Dakar and Abidjan grew into hubs that remain vital today.
Civilization? Or just capitalism dressed in tricolor cloth?
Oh, you're starting to ask the right questions. Algeria was the jewel in the French crown. Not a colony, but officially part of France itself.
French colonialism begins in Algeria in 1830, when the French military comes in, starts a very long conquest that is extremely violent.
The Mediterranean, they said, wasn't a border. It was a bridge. Except the bridge had toll booths, and Muslims rarely got across. In 1865, a law confirmed that Algerian Muslims could apply for citizenship, but only if they abandoned Islamic personal law.
They had to agree to go by French law. So Islam really was separated, I think, in Algeria from the French educational system quite starkly.
In 1870, the Crémieux Decree granted automatic French citizenship to Algeria's Jews, while Muslims remained subjects. One land, two sets of rules. By 1936, the Blum-Violet proposal to extend citizenship stalled. Another paper bridge to nowhere. Educated Algerians, the évolués, once believed in assimilation. Farhat Abbas, a Western-educated Algerian politician and early advocate for assimilation, even declared in the 1930s that Algeria had no nation but France. Yet by the 1940s, after decades of second-class status, Abbas and others turned nationalist. Assimilation had promised equality. Reality had bred rebellion. Still, Algeria's paradox produced new politics. The Crémieux Decree integrated Jews into French civic life. Evolué gained education, professions, and a voice, however limited, in municipal councils. But those cracks in the system also gave rise to leaders and movements that eventually demanded independence.
For some of the mujahidat, or the Algerian female resistance fighters who joined the FLN during the revolution, the nationalist movement, they're the ones we have the most oral stories with and oral histories with because of the efforts of people like Jamila Amran and Natalia Vance. They point to this discrimination that they experienced at school as part of the reason for which they ultimately decided to support nationalism and independence.
Teach someone freedom long enough and they'll start asking why they don't have it.
That's right. Assimilation was supposed to create loyal French subjects. Instead, it often produced rebels fluent in French ideals.
When it became obvious that France wasn't going to be able or wasn't politically willing to deliver on that promise of equality, African political leaders began to turn towards independence as their key demand.
Léopold Senghor, Aimé Césaire, Ferhat Abbas, all educated in French schools, turned those lessons against empire. The pen that signed decrees also signed declarations of independence. To France, this was betrayal. To the colonized, it was consistency.
African leaders said, okay, we're part of the one and indivisible republic, so we want that to become real. We want real equality.
If liberty was universal, then colonial subjects demanded it too.
As early as the early 20th century, you see colonial subjects writing letters to governor generals, to NGOs, to international organizations, complaining that they're not gaining the kinds of liberty and justice and equality that the universalist ideals promised.
The Mission Civilisatrice taught its subjects how to speak French, read Rousseau, and claim equality. And when they did, empire found itself on the receiving end of its own revolution. When France lowered its flags in Africa, it didn't pack up its influence. It just changed the logo.
It's often referred to as France-Afrique. There's these sort of official, semi-official, unofficial links between France and Africa, which take all sorts of different forms, sometimes legal, sometimes not so legal.
Behind the speeches about partnership, France-Afrique ran on three engines: security, currency, and connection. France signed a series of defense agreements with its former colonies, giving itself the right to intervene whenever stability was threatened. From Gabon to Chad to Côte d'Ivoire, French troops landed not with flags, but with missions. Over 50 interventions have taken place since the 1960s, all justified as protecting democracy, citizens, or strategic partners. Then came the money.
They promoted a fiscal regime whereby the franc of Africa was connected to the French franc and later the euro, that would give European companies, would give international companies, French companies, a leg up financially in doing business in Africa.
It ties 14 African nations to the euro, with half their foreign reserves once held in France's treasury.
French control in France-Afrique remained very